many of you have ever seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding? Awesome, most of the crowd. You may recall that the protagonist's father, Mr. Portokalos, is this proud, larger-than-life Greek-American immigrant. And he challenges anyone he meets in the movie to give him a word, any word, and he'll tell you how it comes back to Greek. Now, although some of his examples in the film are a bit of a stretch, he's not all that far off. About 25% of the words in our English language trace back to Greek origin, including the thing I'd like to talk to you about today, trauma. You see, trauma comes from traumatikos, the Greek word meaning wound. I'm a mental health counselor who specializes in the treatment of emotional trauma. For decades, scholars in my field have debated over, argued over, analyzed, manualized all these possible different definitions for the manifestations of human trauma. Names like post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, battle fatigue, shell shock, hysteria, and a host of others have been used over the years. But to intone the words of my personal hero in the study of psychology, the late great George Carlin, we've lost the humanity in all of that jargon. To reclaim that humanity and thus obtain productive solutions for healing, we must go back to the Greek. Trauma comes from traumatikos, the Greek word meaning wound. So I began my career in human services about 14 years ago, first as an English teacher and civilian humanitarian aid worker in Bosnia-Herzegovina. For the last 7 years, I've traveled the country educating other professionals on the importance of trauma-informed care. From my collective experience, there's one thing I know to be true, and that is this world is full of hurt people with unhealed emotional wounding. When these wounds remain unaddressed, we play through the game of life in various degrees of an injured state, or we run the risk of pervasively harming other people by bleeding all over them, metaphorically speaking. So it's not lost on me, folks, that everybody seems to have their own opinions on what's wrong with the world today, and we espouse these lofty solutions for how to fix the world. This is a major reason I've sworn off cable news as part of my own wellness regimen. And family gatherings can sometimes be a challenge. So I don't mean to sound like your know-it-all uncle or that talking head on the TV, yet I must assert my position that we are stuck individually and as a society because unhealed trauma keeps us that way. So to make my case, I could go into a series of slides, diagrams, imagings, demonstrating how unhealed trauma at the level of the human brain can quite literally leave us in various degrees of a near chronic fight, flight, or freeze state. But I'm not going to do that, because you see, I'm still much more an English teacher than I've ever been a scientist when it comes to discussing this content. And I much prefer the beauty of metaphor. So follow me for a moment as we take a look at everything that we know about physical wounding, and then make some comparisons to the emotional. First of all, wounds come in all shapes, sizes, degrees, and variants. They can range in intensity from bumps, bruises, nicks, and cuts to stabs, lesions, contusions, or even dismemberment. And while on the surface, a scrape may seem like no big deal compared to, let's say, the violent blast of a gunshot, they both have something very important in common, and that is for true healing to happen, it must do so from the inside out. Sure, we often apply some kind of treatment from the outside in, like washing out a cut to prevent infection, or dressing a wound for initial stabilization. But for that deep healing to happen, typically wounds need to come into the light to get some air, and a proper course of treatment can help with that process. So a couple things to consider about wound care or wound treatment. First of all, the wrong treatment can make the injury worse, right? Secondly, if the wound continues to get agitated or picked at, it's going to complicate the healing process. And lastly, not all treatment necessarily needs to be professional in order for it to be effective. Let's take, for example, a soccer player. We'll assume he's a relatively healthy man and that he bumps up his knee like this. Treatment or care could imply washing out that wound, putting a Band-Aid on it, and then just giving nature time to do her thing. Same thing applies with the emotional. When we go through these bumps and bruises of life, these negative life experiences, treatment or care can simply mean having that experience validated by someone. Care could mean being surrounded by a support system who sees you through to resilience. Care can simply come in the gift that is time. But think of how many people right here in our city, and indeed all over the world, aren't afforded or aren't shown how to use these most basic resources for healing. So let's stick with the example here of our soccer player. What could happen if he goes back into the game and does nothing? Well, worst case scenario is that he could make himself susceptible to further injury or infection. Others can try to take advantage of the fact he's hurt by throwing him a cheap shot in the field of play. Or he could put others in risk, at danger, because let's face it, open blood sores are generally not considered safe. Or he could go back into the game and nothing could happen. He could go back into the game and score the winning goal, become the hero. And then the memory of that injury is forever encoded with victory. And yes, that may seem like no big deal, but let's face it, we tend to be a society that celebrates the people who perform well hurt. And we criticize or even demonize those who ask for help or otherwise show weakness. And then our soccer player friend here may go back into future games or into other arenas of life. And let's say he gets injured in a more pervasive way. What if he breaks his arm? Does he still run the risk of operating on that same script of you just need to tough it out and be a man? And think of a lot of these other phrases we tend to throw around in our vernacular, like big girls put their big girl pants on. You just need to pull yourself up by the bootstraps already. And the infamous, get over it. What if people haven't been shown how to pull themselves up by these proverbial bootstraps? Or what if the brain is still so frozen at the time of injury that nothing good has ever really been able to get in? So at this point, I'm sure some of you are probably thinking, there goes this touchy-feely shrink. And up next, she's going to lead us all in a rousing chorus of Kumbaya. Don't worry, you're off the hook. I left my guitar at home today. But seriously, I know a lot of you at this point are concerned that by putting this expanded definition of trauma out there, by suggesting that all wounds, regardless of their size, deserve care and attention, that I am just giving people more excuses. Well, when you leave here today, I challenge you to go to your favorite internet search engine and look up something called the ACE study. ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences. This is a multi-year ongoing research collaboration between Kaiser Permanente and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Clear connections have been established between the number of adverse childhood experiences, things like abuse, neglect, growing up in an alcoholic home, growing up in a high-conflict home, an incarcerated parent, and the likelihood of these issues and health conditions developing in young adulthood and then into later adulthood. Just take a moment and let that list sink in. And consider that these data largely reflect people with insurance and people in the United States. What about the rest of the world? Have we even stopped to consider the trauma variable in trying to make sense of global conflict and geopolitical crises? Are we starting to see why unhealed trauma is one of the great public health issues of our time we are just not talking about? So what's the answer here? How do we heal ourselves and help others to do the same? Well, as I shared, I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I'm certainly willing to share with you what worked the best for me. And that was moving to Bosnia. Back in 2000, I was a student on the campus of this very university, and on the outside, I looked like this picture of overachieving success, but on the inside, I was quite frankly a mess. For years, I had learned to stuff down the impact of things like peer bullying, lots of family drama, and in addition to the addiction of overachievement, I eventually discovered that when I drank alcohol, those wounds didn't seem to bother me as much. Yet at some point, it must have clicked that when the alcohol effects wore off, the wounds remained, untreated, unhealed, and unaddressed. My family's of Croatian origin, so naturally I followed the news intently in the 1990s as war raged through the countries of the former Yugoslavia. For a reason now that I could only describe as divine or cosmic intervention, my ancestral homelands called to me at a time in my life when I needed them the most. So I moved to Bosnia, armed with a newly minted college degree, some experience teaching English, my savings, a backpack, and a barrage of family and friends protesting, why the hell would you want to move over there? I went over there to meet people like Janet Leff, an American social worker and humanitarian aid specialist. Upon meeting Janet in Bosnia, she became my teacher, my mentor, my friend, and the woman who facilitated my recovery by showing me what I needed to do to take care of myself. And then she eventually put me on the path I'm on today, helping others as she helped me. I went over there to meet scores of children like Anita, children who would change my life forever. I had the privilege of teaching English and music at Majčino Selo, or Mother's Village, a Croatian parish-run children's home in the enclave Herzegovina, the Croatian enclave of the country. This is Anita. Every day, Anita would watch intently as the older children would play on the swing sets, although she herself was too afraid to try. One day, I coaxed her into giving the swings a go, first by sitting on my lap as we moved together, and then eventually she mustered up the courage to give her own swing a try as I gently pushed her. Every day, she expanded the boundaries of her curiosity, asking me to push her higher and higher. And then one day it happened. She fell. She was trying one of those graceful maneuvers where midair she would jump off for a beautiful landing below. It was something that she saw the older children do. And she fell. Of course, she cried and cried, so I went over there to make sure that she was okay. I thought, she just got used to these swings, and then this had to happen. Surely she's never going to want to go on them again. Yet the resilient Anita proved me wrong. After the initial tears passed, she got back up on that same swing set. And this time she made herself go higher than she ever had before. She cried out for what felt like the whole village to hear, "Look at me! I'm not afraid anymore. Ne bojim se više. I'm not afraid anymore." That day, I learned the most powerful lesson in my life about resilience, taught to me by this 4-year-old child who herself was born into such a chaotic, traumatic environment. To this day, when I struggle with the fear issue, I think back to that memory of Anita and how she taught herself how to ride the swing. And I thank her wherever she is. So Anita's story leaves us with several key points about healing that I'd like to leave you with today. First of all, healing the wounds that keep us stuck typically require that we identify what those wounds are. Because let's face it, folks, we all have them. Secondly, healing these wounds typically requires that we take some action, that we get into movement. And consider that this movement can come in very creative ways, like drumming, dancing, writing, making something. You're going to hear a lot of great ideas throughout the forum today about how we can heal through taking this productive action. This is a picture of me interacting with some of my dance sisters in a program that we do called Dancing Mindfulness. You see, the human brain is hardwired for such amazing resilience, but this resilience is best accessed when we are supported rather than criticized. I think best-selling author Veronica Roth expresses it so beautifully in her novel Allegiant. She says, "Life damages us, everyone. We cannot escape that damage, But now I am also learning this, that we can be mended. We mend each other. We mend each other. It has been an honor and a privilege to open up this TEDx 2015 event here in Youngstown, Ohio, which happens to be my hometown. And I look very forward to hearing my brother and sister speakers share their ideas today for healing our wounds here in our community and in the world entire. Thank you very much.